Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video will be entitled The RFK Jr. PSYOPS. I don't know really what else to call it. It's just more election fraud, malfeasance, debauchery, pacification and control, poppycock mendacity. I mean, that's a lot of words, right? So, you know that Robert Kennedy Jr. has declared his presidency for the November 5th, 2024 presidential election, which fits into the category of completely irrelevant and a waste of your time to think about voting. We're at war. We're under maritime law. In the words of George Carlin, that famous New York parochial school Catholic educated young man, I think from Brooklyn, as he said, choices on a ballot? You mean Coke or Pepsi, aisle or window, smoking or non-smoking, paper or plastic? You mean those choices that are provided on a ballot, which may or may not be counted, may or may not be tampered with? Do you trust our voting system? Of course not. Only an imbecile would trust the voting system. Why don't you put the real issues on there, like 5G tower installation, yes or no? Smart grid, radio frequency weaponry in your neighborhood, yes or no? Chemtrails flown out of local military NATO bases every 6 minutes for 16-hour shifts every day for 6 months, yes or no? Murder and assassination programs decided in secret, yes or no? No audits for banks, yes or no? No audits of the Fed, yes or no? Child trafficking, yes or no? Murder and mayhem, terrorism, funded by banks, yes or no? Those choices do not appear on any ballot. You know what does appear on television, though? Ron DeSantis, Gavin Newsom, Dianne Goldman Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi. Occasionally, you'll see her drunkard husband, Paul Pelosi. He'll appear on television, usually after an arraignment for drunk driving. Anyway, today we're going to focus on, Robert F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We're going to talk about Sr. a little bit, too. You do know that these are fake people, right? They're not real people. I mean, they're actors. They're crisis actors for the clandestine services. In the case of Robert Kennedy Sr., he declared his presidency on March 16th, 1968. Now, that's an auspicious day. That's a Saturday. That's the day of the My Lai massacre. In case you didn't know, Robert Francis Kennedy, United States Senator of New York, the Empire State, he declared his presidency on the day that military intelligence under William Egan Colby, who was Deputy Director of Operation Phoenix on that date for the CIA, sent over 100 military troops into the villages and on the hamlets of My Lai, massacring 504, mostly women, pregnant women, and children, and a few older men. 504 dead people. Don't know how many people were wounded. There were some survivors. The attack was broken up by a very brave helicopter pilot who pointed his 50 caliber machine guns, had his gunner point the machine guns at the 18 and 19-year-old Army troops to cease fire upon unarmed civilians. There were no Viet Cong, there was no ammo found, there were no resistance, there were no bayonets found. The only bayonets that were found at My Lai belonged to NATO forces, United States Army. Anyway, Robert Kennedy declared his candidacy on the day that the United States CIA murdered 504 innocent civilians in Vietnam. Now, nobody knew anything about that until after Sharon Tate was murdered. Similarly, by an M7 bayonet. Don't make me show you the weapon used to kill the 504 people at My Lai. This was attached to the M16 rifle. This is what killed Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger and Wojtek Frykowski and Tom Coomer. The M16 rifle is what killed Stephen Parent. This weapon killed Lino LaBianca the next day and Rosemary LaBianca the next day over in Griffith Park area, Silver Lake, 3301 Waverly Drive. Anyway, the reason that you know about the Charlie Manson story is so that we don't talk about NATO bayonet attacks happening in Los Angeles County. That's why. In other words, if you're going to have a grand murder, you need a grand concealment of the murder. And we have that. We have 53 years of liar, liar, pants on fire, applied linguistics, rabbit holes to dive into. We also have that with the Zodiac killings where no arrest was ever made, no arraignment, no trial, no scapegoat. Anyway, that was all going on when Robert Francis Kennedy declared his candidacy for United States President. And it was 2 weeks after this that Lyndon Baines Johnson stepped aside and said that he would not run for re-election as president. The only reason he had the job in the first place was because John Fitzgerald Kennedy, Robert Kennedy's older brother, was shot in the head, knocking his brains out onto the limousine, shot from the Triple Underpass Railroad Trestle, which is a port facility in Dallas, Texas. If you didn't know, it's a port facility, Dallas, Texas. It was a military intelligence CIA murder in a sparsely populated part of Dallas on the way out of town. I estimate there were less than 100 people present. At least half of those people worked for CIA, were operatives for CIA, or had Secret Service credentials but didn't work for Secret Service. They worked for CIA. That would include Abraham Zapruder. That would include Dan Rather of CBS Evil Masonic Eye. He works for CIA. That's why he's doing interviews of David Crosby and Robert Lamb of the Big Thing, renamed Chicago Transit Authority. Dan Rather is promoting mendacities 50 years after they were hatched. In other words, we have artists who don't write their own music but are held up as great songwriters, and it's a fraud. And we have people like Dan Rather telling you that clearly the shot came from behind. That's what he said. He lied. Liar, liar, pants on fire. Who's the bigger liar, Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather? It's hard to tell. They're both up there, right? Well, maybe it's Robert Kennedy Jr. Maybe he's the biggest pathological liar we got. But anyway, before we had Robert Kennedy Jr., which we're going to get into in a second, we had Robert Francis Kennedy Sr., and he declared his candidacy on the day of My Lai massacre. It's before the Sharon Tate murder. It's before the first Zodiac killings, allegedly. They were branded Zodiac killings. It's very possible they were not Zodiac killings. They were just killings up at Lake Herman in Vallejo, Benicia area of Solano County. That was like December 20th, 1968. That was after Robert Kennedy was murdered by Lockheed employee Thane Eugene Caesar at the Wilshire Boulevard Ambassador Hotel, 3400 Wilshire Boulevard. Robert Francis Kennedy was shot behind his right ear by Thane Eugene Caesar, employee of the Skunk Works at Burbank Lockheed, Hollywood Burbank Airport. Yes, and you've heard about Saran Saran. It had nothing to do with killing Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy had a presidency campaign of 82 days. Apparently some moron has written a book called 85 Days. If you add up the days from March 16th, 1968 until Robert Kennedy was declared dead on June 6th, around 1:45 a.m. in the morning, he lingered for 24 hours before he died. That adds up to 82 days. So I don't know how you get 85 out of 82, but hey, everything with these CIA cover-ups is false. They can't even count the days correctly. Do the math. Add up the number of days from March 16th until June 6th. Add them up. I double dare you. You're not going to get 85. All right. So the procession of death that preceded the Wilshire Boulevard Ambassador Hotel murder assassination of Robert Kennedy was very macabre and very bizarre. We had John Frankenheimer keeping Robert Kennedy and his wife Ethel at his Malibu colony, gated colony. That's a CIA compound for CIA-controlled people. John Frankenheimer was the director for Hollywood of The Manchurian Candidate, which John Kennedy had given permission to film at the White House. Manchurian Candidate, in case you don't know, involves CIA, MK Ultra, mind controlling people to become assassins of military or political leaders. You know, kind of like John Kennedy was, kind of like Robert Kennedy was. And it was John Frankenheimer himself who drove Robert Kennedy in his Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud III from the Malibu gated colony to 3400 Wilshire Boulevard to the Ambassador Hotel in a friggin' limousine. And they would have had to driven right past where Charlie Miles Maddox, Manson's living. He's living at 14400 Sunset Boulevard in the Will Rogers CIA Columbia Broadcasting CBS property, 1400 400. You know, where Neil Young hung out at the swimming pool, watching the bikini-clad girls dance and sing, writing poetry, playing the guitar with Charlie Miles Maddox. And Robert Kennedy would have driven right past that property in order to get over to Wilshire Boulevard in order to drive southeast to the Ambassador Hotel, which would be on his right. 3400 Wilshire Boulevard. That is a procession of death. That's a minimum of a 60-minute drive in a Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud III due to traffic and distance. It's not an easy-peasy drive. It's 60 minutes of driving. I double dare you to do that drive on your own today. It's going to take you 60 minutes. If you broke the law, you could maybe do it in 54 minutes, but you'd probably get pulled over. All right, so anyway, it was decided by somebody to not deal with the Kennedys in the 1968 election, and we got Richard Nixon instead. And Richard Nixon had his own little assassination after his second election. His re-election in 1972 led to Watergate, which was a CIA assassination program involving Frank Fiorini, which you know as Frank Sturgis, and E. Howard Hunt, and all the usual CIA suspects, because all the burglars work for CIA. All of them. All 6 burglars work for CIA. 6 out of 6. So it sounds like a CIA operation, right? Anyway, that gave rise to Richard Helms being convicted for perjury and reassigned with a pay raise to Tehran, Iraq, set up the hostage crisis, and William Egan Colby, my favorite spook, becoming the CIA director. So I'm all excited about the Watergate debacle and that Richard Helms was presented as the pathological liar that he was. Now, so is William Colby. He's a pathological liar also, but it's just I prefer his lying style to Richard Helms. And that gets to the root of the story, because today we have Robert Kennedy Jr., and he's thrown his hat into the ring, to coin a phrase. He declared his presidency was formally launched on April 19th this year, 2023, so just a couple weeks ago. Robert F. Kennedy, 1 year and 7 months before the election, we have Robert Kennedy declaring his candidacy for president. Even though we have a sitting senile dementia president, Joe Biden, who I prefer. I prefer a president who wears diapers and is out of it, because that's authentic. That's very authentic. Anything like a Ron DeSantis or a Gavin Newsom or a Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is going to be fraudulent, because they have no authority to make any decisions. They're not in charge. They have no power. And if they ever did try to throw their weight around on television, they'd be canceled, deleted, the microphone will break. You'll be treated like a Berkshire Hathaway conference where you are not permitted to speak the truth in front of Warren Buffett or Bill Gates or their Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which Warren Buffett is a partner in. So I'm telling you is that you've got a real situation where there is not going to be anyone that's going to save you or save us who's going to be declared president. We're under military law, people. If you delve into Robert Kennedy Jr., you will see a boy who liked to take drugs and goof off and chase women. He's also been married 3 times. He's been divorced twice. His second wife committed suicide at age 52 by hanging herself. And then he goes on to marry the Larry David comedian fake wife Cheryl Hines. So he's married to a Hollywood Screen Actors Guild professional CIA social engineer, Cheryl Hines, who advocates the PCR test, which of course is a DNA collections tool, not a test. So you've got a compromised dude here in the form of Robert Francis Kennedy Jr., born January 17, 1954. He's 69 years old. He went to Harvard University. He went to the London School of Economics. He got a law degree from the University of Virginia. And then he has a master's degree from Pace University. These are all clandestine schools. He's completely indoctrinated. He is an actor. He claims to be sort of kind of an anti-vaxxer, but he waffles back and forth because he believes in vaccinations, but he doesn't believe in vaccinations. He talks out of both sides of his mouth, and he's a pathological liar, so I wouldn't believe him, and I would not believe anything that he said. You'd be better off going back and talking to Emily Black, his first wife, who he divorced 12 years into their marriage, whereupon he married Mary Richardson and divorced her 6 years in, and then she mysteriously hangs herself around the time of their divorce. That's creepy. And now he's on, he meets Cheryl Hines quick like a bunny rabbit, and they get married in 2014. I mean, Cheryl Hines looks like a train wreck. So that's 3 marriages. Now that is less than the usual Hollywood marriage. You'll notice that his grandfather, Joseph Kennedy, never got divorced, but had many, many, many girlfriends, just like William Randolph Hearst did, including Marion Davies, who got a street named after her above the Sharon Tate murder scene. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that I put Ron DeSantis and Gavin Newsom and Nancy Pelosi and Willie Brown and Paul Pelosi. I put them all in the same category of crisis actors to be ignored, dismissed, and you never follow these people. They are disinformation artists. They are all indoctrinated. In the case of Ron DeSantis, he's the most indoctrinated because he actually has Navy prisoner dilemma game training at Guantanamo Bay and at Fallujah on the Euphrates River in Iraq, torturing people with the biscuit teams. Biscuit teams? Look it up. Biscuit. It's medical doctors, psychiatrists, nurses that will keep your torture victim alive while you perform enhanced interrogation torture upon them. The idea is to keep them alive. Don't let them die. Force feed them, give them enemas, but don't let them die. I'm not kidding. Ask Ron DeSantis about that. Or ask his father, who installed Nielsen boxes on people's television, aka surveillance. Or ask Ron DeSantis about his younger sister, who was murdered, suicided, killed in London, England, and she was engaged to a London banker at the time of her death. Go ask Ron DeSantis about his younger sister, Christine. Go ask him. I double dare you. Never comes up. Ask him about Guantanamo Bay and whether he liberated any prisoners, with his Geneva Convention PSYOPS. Ask him if he saved anyone's life at Guantanamo Bay. Go ahead, ask him. Nobody seems to want to know. All right, well, anyway, that's my video for today, people. Is nothing new to see here. The Kennedy family is a psyops. Kudos to John Kennedy because he actually did have Robert Kennedy Sr. make arrests of over 1,800 drug dealers, all of whom worked for the organized crime CIA, and that he wanted to issue treasury bonds, silver certificates from the treasury, and evade the bankers. He wanted to, through National Security Order number 263, withdraw CIA contractors in Saigon and throughout Southeast Asia. He wanted to shut down William Egan Colby's program of Cords, which was in the works. Cords was in the works in 1963. Yes, it was. Anyway, it was just waiting for the Bay of Tonkin incident, which hadn't happened yet. But all this COVID stuff, all the Vietnam stuff, it's the same stuff. It's pacification and control. It's all been on the blueprint drawers for hundreds of years. Before COVID, we had the bubonic plague, we had the Asian flu, we had the swine flu, we had mad cow disease. You think that the COVID, pandemic was a new idea? It's an old idea. It's very old. And you'll notice that the bubonic plague, as dangerous as it was, it didn't kill everybody. How come everybody is still alive? I don't get it. How did some people survive? I mean, at least 50% of the people didn't die, minimum. All you got to do is just don't drink the water out of the river because it looks like the river's polluted. So don't be getting your water out of that river. Thanks for listening. Hit the like and subscribe. I am totally shadow banned on all my channels. Thank you. Take care.